Senator Barb Goodwin challenged some of the assumptions made during that state government meeting. She joins me now to talk about those. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Julie.
Senator, let's begin with your point that was made during the hearing. It was essentially that Secretary of State Mark Ritchie ran and was elected as a DFL candidate for the office of Secretary of State. DFL legislators and Governor Mark Dayton did not support the proposed amendments passed by the GOP-controlled legislature. You believe he's doing his job. How so?
I do. Well, first of all, there's a statute that specifically says that the Secretary of State shall title an amendment to the Constitution. So he's not asked to do it, or maybe he should do it, but it's definitely by statute since 1919 part of his job. And up until this point, there's never been an argument or disagreement about that. The Secretary of State did approve a legislative title on the Legacy Amendment a few years ago, but that was the first time in history of the state that the Secretary of State had not actually written the title him or herself. So it is his job. It is his job, definitely, and there should be no doubt about that. And there's no similar proposal that says that, or statute that says that legislators can title the amendment. It only applies to the Secretary of State. That's his job.
So do you believe that the titles that were chosen by the Secretary of State could dissuade voters from supporting these amendments? And do you think that's an issue in all of this?
I don't know. I'm going to leave that for the court to decide. I think that the title should reflect what's going to be the result of that too. And all through the session, we were trying to get a better explanation or some layout of what this means to people and how it's going to work and how people are going to have absentee ballots, and are they going to send photos in or whatever, and how people are going to afford, if they have to get a copy of their birth certificate or their marriage certificate or whatever, they do. This statute won't cover that. It'll cover the free ID, picture ID, but it won't cover any other costs that, so that's like a poll tax. So we said, let's spell this out a little bit better in statute. And so we know what it's going to look like for people. People know what it's going to look like when it gets done, but that was not allowed under the majority in the Senate.
We interviewed Senator Perry a little bit earlier in the program on this issue, and he stated that he believes people expect the governor to use the bully pulpit on issues that he opposes. But Senator Perry feels it's the duty of the Secretary of State to educate people on the amendment proposal and not to look down the road on whether or not the amendment passes. So what do you think?
Well, I think that's a pretty mixed message there, because there's no possible way that you can actually inform people about the amendment without telling them how the good and the bad things about what might happen with it. And I think it's his job. I mean, his job is to it should be to make the voting process as simple and clear as possible to people. And if he believes that this is not simple and clear, as I believe, then I think that is his right to express that to people, because he's the one that's hired by the citizens of Minnesota to oversee the election system and the voting system, and they know that when they elect him.
And I'd like to challenge you a little bit on that statement. You're talking about him overseeing the voting process. Do you think this issue is related to process, or is it more about the issue?
It's definitely about process, because it's going to change the entire process for voting. We don't even know yet whether or not a driver's license will be an acceptable form of ID, for example. Possible that it will, but also possible that it won't. We don't know if a state ID, not a driver's license, but a state ID is under this provision. We're still not quite sure whether military, and I know it says government issued, so maybe military IDs are going to be accepted, but there's so many unknowns in there.
What about with the other amendment, the marriage amendment? That doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the voting process, and yet he has also proposed changing the title on that as well.
Yeah, and again, I suppose that would be just under the fact that it is his duty to write the titles, and he decided that the title of that wasn't descriptive enough for the public. And so whether or not he's right or wrong, I guess the court will decide that. But
okay, Senator Perry, he did pose this question as well when we interviewed him. Is the Secretary of State, in effect, campaigning against these ballot initiatives using tax dollars? How would you answer that question?
I don't think he is, quite frankly. And I remember all the years, 24 years or whatever it was, that Joan Grow had the office of the Secretary of State, and she went out and talked to people about voting and about she worked all that time to try to simplify the process for voting, and we're very much one of the top states for people that go out to vote. And so as far as that amendment, he has the right to change the wording on it, and you know, more power to him. The system of checks and balances is so important. We can't have legislators going in there and saying other constitutional officers can't say this or that, or can't do this or that, because that totally interferes with our checks and balances. And I'm glad the legislature decided back in 1919 to do this, because it makes it a more fair process. The way it is, they get to bypass the governor with an amendment. And they're using amendments to our Constitution, which they claim Constitution is so important, to discriminate or to make it harder for people to vote. And doing that will definitely have a negative impact on our Constitution, and people need to respect that document. And so if you say you want people to go by the Constitution, but then you want to remake the Constitution into your own personal views, that's something that hasn't been done before, and that's what bothers me most about this.
My last question for you, Senator Goodwin, is should constitutional amendments, legislation anyway, constitutional amendment legislation, in your opinion, should it be passed by a supermajority?
Absolutely. I absolutely believe that, because it's so important. What goes on the ballot is so important. And we do want people to understand it. And even with a legacy amendment, you know, I'm not sure they understood everything that would entail, because it's a lot of money for a lot of years, taxpayer money. So I'm not sure they did. And, you know, we want them to be able to understand totally what they're doing, because once it goes in the Constitution, it's very hard, almost impossible to get it out. In fact, I don't know of cases. There may be some in Minnesota where sometimes, because something became totally outdated, they were removed from the Constitution, but on farming or on something. So yeah, I think it definitely is a supermajority or a governor's veto. This is something that didn't happen when Pawlenty was in power for 8 years, and even when the Democrats had the majority, we didn't bypass him by going to a constitutional amendment when he didn't like a bill of ours. We normally didn't even send bills over that we knew he would veto, because it's a waste of everybody's time. But we certainly never bypassed him with a constitutional amendment, and I think that the process is important, and keeping the process clean is very important.
With those words, Senator Barb Goodwin, thanks for your time and your perspective. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Julie. I appreciate it.